Well, Gavin, welcome to Fully Scored. Thank you so much for joining us today. Are you keeping well?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It's great to be on the podcast. I've been listening since the very beginning, so it's great to be a part of this.
Oh, excellent. Well, hopefully you'll be well versed in the way this segment might go, which is brilliant. And I'm sure that many listeners will know that you've recently taken over Dorothy Gates's role as the chief music publisher. I can't remember the official title for the USA Eastern Territory. First of all, what is the official title, and how is that role going?
So, my title is Senior Music Producer, which is editing the publication's USA Eastern Territory, but also writing for the staff band and for the staff songsters as well. So, it's been going good, probably about 9 months in now, and it's had its challenges, but also some very exciting opportunities to write and to edit. So.
And I understand that the New York Staff Band's recorded a few of your pieces recently as well, to be released soon, I think.
Yes, those two new pieces that I wrote. One Derek had asked me to write for the recording, and then I had another idea for a piece called "The Invitation," which actually became is going to be the title track for the recording. So I'm very excited about that.
Wonderful. Look forward to hearing those indeed. So, we're not going to be talking about those pieces today, perhaps
No.
in the future, but we're going to be speaking about a piece of Salvation Army music, a selection, Divine Communion, by Arthur Gullidge. First of all, you chose this piece to look at. Is there any reason behind your choice for this piece of repertoire?
I really love this piece, and I've only played it a couple of times. But the one time that I did play it was at my mum and dad's retirement from officership. And it was then that I discovered that the core band that my dad was playing in at the time, before his officership, was playing this piece. And this was some of the tunes in this were part of the sealing of his call to officership. So it became very personal to him. And then I love the story. As much as it's a tragic one, it's a very interesting story of Arthur Gullidge and how he came to write this piece. And so that's probably one of the reasons why we've chosen it today.
Fantastic. Well, shall we start off with that story for listeners that may not
Yep.
know a little bit about the history of a composer we perhaps most often see at the top right hand corner of marches, but yeah, maybe people don't know his story.
So Arthur Gullidge is an Australian composer, and there's a number of different sources that I used in looking at his life. Um, the ABC in Australia actually did a piece that's on YouTube on their Compass program, which is a religious program. Um, and so it tells the story of Arthur Gullidge's life. And then Major David Woodbury also did an article in one of the Army's publications in Australia. But Arthur was born in Broken Hill, which is out in the outback of Australia, away from nowhere. His father was a miner, and he died in a mining accident when Arthur was very young. So then he moved to Tasmania with his mother, and his mother had been an officer before then, so she became an officer once again, and they ended up in Melbourne serving in different places. And it was here that Arthur got his first training as a musician on cornet at the Melbourne City Corps, and then progressed in his abilities so that he eventually was the deputy bandmaster at Melbourne City, and then bandmaster at Collingwood Corps for a brief time, and then he became the bandmaster at the Brunswick Corps. And it was here that he started delving into composition, writing for his corps band, and he had some works published by the Salvation Army, but he also wrote music for outside bands as well that he published in the Regal Brass Band Journal under the name of Arthur Greendale. So he used a pseudonym with um, Salvationists not supposed to be using their talents outside the army in their musical sense. So, but the pivotal point in Arthur's life came at the start of World War II, and when war was declared, Arthur, along with a good number of his bandsmen, all enlisted together, and they formed an Australian Army band with a few extra people. So they were a band of the regular army, also working as stretcher bearers during the war. And so they were appointed to Papua New Guinea on the town of Rabaul. And it was while they were stationed there that one of the bandsmen whose name was Wilfred Trigg, had an accordion, and he'd been sent 3 songs that were new to the Salvation Army repertoire at that time, and he played them on the accordion. And from there, Arthur Gullidge crafted this selection, Divine Communion, which was probably played for the first time by that army band, the regular army, not Salvation Army band, on the island of Rabaul in Papua New Guinea. And shortly after that, the island was invaded by the Japanese, and most of the members of the band were taken as prisoners of war. And they were put on a transport ship that was on its way to the Philippines, I think, to a prisoner of war camp. And it was at that time that the ship was torpedoed, and Arthur Gullidge and many of the members of the band lost their lives. And he was 33 years old at the time.
Really tragic story there, but fascinating for us now to understand a little bit about their history, and perhaps gives even more meaning to this music. So I think now would be a good time perhaps to look at the piece in a little bit more detail. And I guess the beginning is a place like no other to begin.
The piece opens with a beautiful introduction. The first 4 measures are 2 measures that are repeated at a step higher on the melody in the cornets, comes to a climax in the 5th measure, and then quickly dies away to a piano. And then right before letter A, when we hear the first tune, you hear the basses and the euphoniums pick up a little bit of that melody, or the same shape of that melody that we had in the first couple of measures. And then that leads us into letter A.
So at letter A, we have the first tune, as you said, All There Is of Me, Lord. What can you tell us about that melody?
So this was a piece that was written by Sidney Cox, who has written many Salvation Army songs, and it is really a song of commitment. So I'll just read you some of the lyrics of the first verse and the chorus. It says, "All there is of me, Lord, at thy feet I lay. Now their gracious purpose, O fulfill, I pray. Each moment, Lord, be spent for thee. Thou shalt have all there is of me." And then the chorus is probably the more familiar part of this tune, because this is the one that survived into our songbook today. All there is of me, Lord, all there is of me. Time and talents day by day, all I bring to thee. All there is of me, Lord, all there is of me. On thy altar, here I lay, all there is of me. And Arthur sets this very nicely. The verse starts with the horns with the melody, accompanied by the lower end of the band. And that's all the way through the verse. It's marked as piano, but as we come to that line, each moment, Lord, be spent for thee, it comes to a pause, fermata, and then very quietly, thou shalt have all there is of me. And that's letter A. And then letter B, we hear the chorus for the first time. The chorus is just the upper instruments of the band, so that the melody is in the lower solo cornet, first cornet, and flugelhorn, but with beautiful obligato from the upper cornets and supported just by the horns. There's no basses at all, and it's pianissimo. It's very difficult to play. When we get to the second half of the chorus there, he adds a little bit of color with adding the baritones, the euphonium, and just the E-flat bass. And it's not until we get to the line, on thy altar here I lay, that we first hear the full band together.
Beautiful. prayerful moment there. So that takes us on to letter C, where we have the second melody, entitled Sweet Will of God. Not a melody I'm familiar with. So could you tell us a little bit about this tune?
So this was published in the musical Salvationist, and it's also as a duet, actually, words by Mrs. C.H. Morris. Don't know who that is. But it was also in some of our earlier songbooks as well. And I remember singing this song as a child during just the chorus during prayer meetings at the core. And one of the interesting things leading into this, between the two songs, there's only a 2-measure transition between the two, and there's a key change, but instead of stopping on the dominant of the new key, he actually stops on a D major chord, speaking in B flat pitch, which is the dominant of the relative minor of B flat. But it's a beautiful moment. It's not your usual key change, which is wonderful. But he just uses the chorus of this song, which is very simple. Sweet will of God, still fold me closer till I am wholly lost in thee. And that line is repeated again, but with a different melody. So at letter C, we've got a flugel solo with this beautiful melody, accompanied by solo on first horns, the baritones, euphonium basses. And the euphonium has a beautiful line that weaves around the melody, and I almost think that's a little bit like the melody being folded around the euphonium, and a word picture of the love of God still coming around us. And then at measure 9 of C, we have 4 measures where we have a crescendo from pianissimo up for 1 measure and then back down, up and back down. And it's the repeat of those words, sweet will of God, still draw me closer. And it's like almost like a pleading, I think, from Arthur for God's will to be a part of his life. And then we hear the final part of that tune, till I am fully lost in thee.
Challenging for most bands to play this. A lot of the music very sustained, but at this pianissimo dynamic. Tough to do. Any pointers perhaps for bands that may be looking to play this?
Breath control is the key to all of this, is just having that support for the sound. And letter D is probably even harder than the previous section, because we have the full band. The melody is in the lower half of the band from the baritones down, but it's the melodies at piano, the upper parts at pianissimo, and it just sits very nicely over the top of that beautiful melody. But again, very, very hard to play. I don't envy the cornets that have to do it, especially the soprano player, and just sort of sit on the top and just sparkle. And we have, again, the same thing happens in letter D that happened in letter C, measure 9 through 12. We have these rises and falls in that melody. I think Arthur deliberately used that technique to try and express something in the music of the words.
That takes us to letter E, titled Espressivo. What can we look for in this section?
So this is one section where it's all really original material from Arthur. So this is a transition between the second tune and the third tune, but it really, I think this is his personal expression of his walk with the Lord. We have the melody again in the horns. It's moving in eighths, so there's room for rubato there with the interpretation, expressive style. Again, these rises and falls all the way through this section in dynamics. Small crescendo, small decrescendo. So there's really lots of room to express the emotion of what's happening in the music. And again, comes back right at the end of letter F, right at the end of letter E, going into letter F to a pianissimo chorus or fermata to lead us into the final tune.
And that final tune is titled Holy Spirit, Faithful Guide. Again, what are you able to tell us about this melody and perhaps why Arthur Gullidge chose to use this in the trilogy?
So again, this was not a song that I was familiar with, and had to go to the archives of the musical salvations to find this piece. But again, the words really talk about the Lord walking with the Christian, and being near and ever present. So the words, Holy Spirit, faithful guide, ever near the Christian side, gently lead us by thy hand, pilgrims in a desert land. Weary souls, for I rejoice, while they hear that sweetest voice, whispering softly, Wanderer come, follow me, I'll guide thee home. When you think about the story of Arthur Gullidge and what happens after, that last line really hits me. Follow me, I'll guide you home. I don't think there was any doubt that when that torpedo hit that boat, where Arthur Gullidge was going, he was going to his heavenly home.
So, a fairly simple treatment of this tune to bring the piece to its conclusion. Again, is there anything that we should look out from perhaps just studying the score or even as players in this closing section?
Again, I think he's done a little bit of word painting. The first section is repeated, and it's almost the full band, but there's no basses and UFOs. So the bass of that section is the bass trombone. Even though it's piano, it's a little bit brighter, not so much depth on the bottom. And then the middle phrase is the horns and the euphonium. So again, we don't have that strong bottom end to the sound. When we get to the next phrase, again, it's cornets, baritones, trombones. The basses do come in, but it's still not the full band. But it's only when we get to Follow Me, I'll Guide You Home that the full band comes in, and you get that weight of that statement. And it comes in at mezzo forte, which I think is probably almost the high point in terms of dynamics that we've had all the way through the piece of music. Everything has been less than that. And then it leads us into the final section of the coda, which is letter G.
Looks short on the score, but actually it's a fairly long piece of music. So how does he bring this to its conclusion?
So again, he brings in a little bit of original music of his own, and it just sits quietly. But when we get to 5 bars from the end, I almost feel like this is a conversation. We have this little moment where the basses have a moving line for one measure, and then the cornets and the flugel have a similar moving line, a little bit contrary to it. But I almost think this is a conversation. When we're communing with God, there's a conversation between God and us. And I feel like that's his little moment of saying, this is maybe the basis is the voice of God, and then the cornets is our response to the word of God and what God says to us. And then again, it just, piano decrescendo down to almost nothing at the end. And it brings us to a beautiful close. Again, soprano cornet sitting on a high F, just fades away to nothing.
And you'll have made a lot of bass players very happy there, I'm sure, hearing that they are the voice of God.
Voice of God.
Not often that's been said. Well, thank you so much, Gavin, for joining us on the podcast and for giving us an insight into a little perhaps hidden gem here in our journals, and allowing us to find a little bit more out about the history of Arthur Gullidge as well through the music. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.